Thank you, Gabriela, and good morning, everybody, to the next session titled Taking Stock. So where are we with the transitional justice approach for addressing a long history of anti-Gypsyism? And I have the pleasure to invite here to this panel this morning. First of all, Gabriela Chabanova, the director of Ergo Network, will stay with us, not as a moderator, but as a panelist with her long-standing experience. Then we have Julius Rostas, the former chair of Romani Studies at the Central European University, who has worked on this topic also before and is part of our CHACHIPEN research team. Also, I wonder if we can actually screen and hear the presentation of the names, if that is available. And we have with us Lina Bosiliute, the SEPS research fellow, and dedicated very much to this project. And last but not least, Markus End, the chair of the Society for the Research on Anti-Gypsyism in Germany, and also current member of the Independent Commission on Anti-Gypsyism, established by the German government, who also joined the CHACHIPEN Advisory Board. Welcome to all of you. I think while we still are maybe in the beginning of really applying and promoting this transitional justice approach, it's important to acknowledge that this is not the first step in this whole process. And here I remind you that it's only 6 years ago that on 15 April 2015, thanks to the advocacy of, at that time, member of the European Parliament, Soraya Post, the European Parliament adopted a resolution for the recognition of the Holocaust of Sinti and Roma and for the recognition of 2nd August as the European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. And it was 2 years later, following a report by Soraya Post, that the transitional justice approach and the model of truth and reconciliation commission was at the center of a European Parliament resolution. And this we took up together when we met 2 years ago during the EU Roma Week in a first conference to discuss and to reflect the value and the importance and the direction of this transitional justice approach. And it was Soraya Post who opened that, and unfortunately she cannot be with us, but her direction and her vision in this work is always leading, and I think in our fight. And I share here in the chat, hopefully with everybody, some of her words, and just let me express them as she opened the conference in 2019, saying, we need public acknowledgement about what the Roma have gone through. Our history has to be recognized by the mainstream societies as part of a single European history. Our history has to be presented in the books of school children. Then public apologies have to be made. Statues and memorials have to be raised to commemorate Roma victims in the EU and in the accession countries. Otherwise, all these past, unrecognized and unremembered atrocities keep feeding anti-Gypsyism, keep unconsciously poisoning our societies. And I included a longer version of the statement in the text in the chat. Now, as it has been already mentioned, a part of that process that led us to today was also a landmark study by SEPS, also with the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism, on truth, reconciliation, and justice for addressing anti-Gypsyism. And this aimed at learning from South African, Canadian, Australian truth and reconciliation processes, and from the Swedish Commission on Anti-Gypsyism. So these are some of the aspects we want to take up this morning and see and take stock. Where do we stand in our understanding of the transitional justice approach, and where what have we achieved so far regarding the recognition of anti-Gypsyism, but also what needs to be done. I remind, just for the reminder, first of all, we need to speak slow enough so our interpreters can do their job in the interpretation to Romani language. And I remind also you to join us in the discussion on Twitter you can interact with the CHACHIPEN EU account and using the hashtags No Anti-Gypsyism, Truth Reconciliation, EU for Roma, and EU Anti-Racism. So you can also, all the participants here in the online conference can also post their questions in the Q&A function. So we'll try to do our best to make this interactive. And so I'm asking our panelists not to take a long speech, but rather let's have a short debate. So let me start with you, Gabriela. ELGA has been advocating for 15 years for the recognition of anti-Gypsyism, to recognize anti-Gypsyism as a root cause of exclusion. Can you share why is that recognition so important, and where are we now if you take stock in that development in the advocacy in the last years?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and yeah, I'm glad to continue being with you here on the screen. I think that we somehow are kind of getting to the position that we are acknowledging that anti-Gypsyism has deep historical roots in our societies, and that the relation between majority population and those stigmatized as gypsies, it's kind of described as a common heritage, and it's underscore the persistence and occurrence in different countries in Europe and beyond. And we also are starting to understand that Romani people are not the cause of this ideology. So we are shifting this approach, and also with the tools and the measures that we are proposing, we are turning it from the Roma to the majority of society. And we also have to see that the effects of the historical discrimination and persecution, though we speak about, for example, the slavery of Romani people in nowadays Romania, or we talk about the persecution policies against the Gypsies or the Roma during the genocide perpetrated by the National Socialist Germany, or also today's mention coercive sterilization of Romani women. So this is something that brings some sort of a trauma to the people and also to the generations they are coming now. And we have highlighted on numerous occasions that the success of any Roma-related policy depends on essentially on everyone's commitment to fight anti-Gypsyism and racial discrimination as the root cause. So, and today we see some results of these joint steps that we've taken together. As Jonathan already mentioned, we have a recognition at the European level. We have at least 7 European Parliament resolutions mentioning the fight against anti-Gypsyism. We have 2 Council conclusion recommendations and 2 Commission communication on Roma. We also have the ECRI document, and we have the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism definition, and we also have the IHRA definition that is offering a new tool for the participating states. And somehow in this new EU strategic framework for Roma inclusion and the latest Council recommendation, anti-Gypsyism is recognized as an institutional form of racism that affecting Roma communities across Europe, leading to social exclusion, poverty, limited access to fundamental rights, economical and social rights of Roma. And in this process, now when the national member state have to design their strategic framework, member states are invited to develop, adopt, and implement their strategies. They have to include enforcing equality legislation, mainstreaming Roma equality, inclusion and participation in the EU policy initiative, and what is very important also to mobilize the EU funds for Roma for combating the anti-Gypsyism. We are also kind of looking at those minimum commitments that the government has to make. and the fight against anti-Gypsyism and discrimination is there. It should be, and I think that's important milestone. It should be a key objective, but also cross-cutting priority in each policy area, because we have to complement the inclusion approach. Member states are now finalizing their strategies, and they should present them by September 2021. However, it's still important to ensure that these strategies have effective access to the economical and social justice and equal opportunities for Roma. And those member states who has a significant Roma population, they should include in their national strategies more ambitious commitment, because what we are also seeing that those commitments that are given by the guideline of the Commission, we should kind of go beyond them, and we should really reflect the need on the ground and ensure measures that are preventing and fighting anti-Gypsyism, but also segregation, education, housing, because I think we just cannot make just kind of decreasing the segregation education by 50%. We have to just go to the zero segregation education, and we have to tackle the anti-Roma prejudices and stereotypes. And Madame Jourova, she talked also about those, including online, which sort of takes an acknowledgement. What is also important at this very moment that we have this new action plan against racism, which is acknowledging the anti-Gypsyism as well as a fight among the kind of anti-racism framework. And we have to ensure that anti-Gypsyism is mainstream. So those action plans that will be implemented on the national level also have to include the fight against anti-Gypsyism. And that's, I think that kind of going forward, we have to step up in the advocacy that works with the EU institutions on achieving the legal acknowledgement. And in this context of the EU initiative for the future of EU equality legislation. And there is also the initiative of Roma France, which kind of takes it to the another level and demanding a legislative act on Roma. And we believe that this can also enable a greater impact on at the national level, because we are practically the biggest minority, and still the tools and measures are not working. And as a sort of a method, and I think also for us, for the civil society, we have to really make sure that we are taking a strong partnership and building the coalitions with the key stakeholders at the national level, and ensuring that there is no compromise or misunderstanding of anti-Gypsyism, that this is a form of racism, white rage manifestation. And I still have 24 seconds, okay. and it's also important that Romani NGOs are able to define themselves as anti-racism organizations, and that we should not actually fear that we would kind of lose the funding, or that kind of that we are stepping in this new direction, that we are not articulating the Roma inclusion only from the social perspective, but also from this anti-racial perspective, and that it's important to tap into all mainstream policies in general, because for this change, we need to create synergies with other civil society movements at the national level, become less fragmented, and really make sure that Roma are targeted in the policies of anti-racism, social inclusion, non-discrimination, inter-ethnic dialogue, social economic development, even a Green Deal, and citizen rights. So this is for the start, and I hope that we will still have some time for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Gabriela, for raising all these various aspects, in particular to raise that we need to understand also the connection and how the struggle against anti-Gypsyism is embedded and is part of also the overall fight against racism, how to build coalitions, and how Roma civil society is also an anti-racism civil society. And I think what is important, while you highlight already that there has been developments on the institutional level, that this recognition has been put in papers and resolutions, in strategies, of course, we all remain with the question, how this actually changes reality and how this changes something on the ground. Now here I want to make sure that let's go deeper in particular on the issue of what is the value of the transitional justice approach in this context. It's not maybe the only reflecting the whole aspect and the various venues regarding preventive reactive strategies to fight anti-Gypsyism, but it can make a particular contribution. And I'm glad that we have Julius Rostasch with us, who has done extensive work, both academic work, both on anti-Gypsyism, but also on the transitional justice approach. Julius, you were part of that first study on truth, reconciliation, and justice. And I would like to ask you to share with us how we can use the potential of this approach. Why is this needed? And how it can also contribute to increase the recognition and also the fight against anti-Gypsyism. Julius.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'd like to welcome everyone to the launch of this very interesting project, CHACHIPEN, Reality in Romani Language, and truth, of course. The first thing I'd like to say is that there are plenty of definitions of anti-Gypsyism. Anti-Gypsyism has been defined by institutions such as European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance of the Council of Europe, the European Commission, the European Council, scholars, the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism, more recently also International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And I am not going to repeat here the definitions. Yeah. I just mentioned a key feature of all these definitions is about the role of the state in producing and reproducing anti-Gypsyism. Yeah. But in order to understand anti-Gypsyism and how it works, we need to contextualize. Yeah. And why we need to contextualize anti-Gypsyism is, on the one, there are 5 important reasons to contextualize. First is that by contextualization, we recognize the internal diversity of Roma. Then, by contextualization, we also give a voice to different Roma groups. Roma is not a one-voice group. There are many voices inside the Roma, and I think that's one way to not essentialize Roma, but to see this diversity. Then, of course, the third point is the acknowledgement of the diversity of experiences of Roma in all the countries in which they live. There are significant differences, and we have to take into account when we analyze anti-Gypsyism. Then it's also an empowerment tool. Contextualization is an empowerment tool for many Roma activists, especially that they have a right to choose what kind of denomination or concept should be used to express the racism and oppression against Roma in their national context and in the majority language. And the fifth point is that it broadened the analysis of the Roma situation. Yeah. So it's not only about the socioeconomic conditions or the political context, but it's also about the historical perspective of the Roma. I think it's important to emphasize that combating anti-Gypsyism is a matter of social justice. It's not a privilege for the Roma. And that I'll stress. Combating anti-Gypsyism is a matter of social justice. Thus, historically and institutionally rooted injustices perpetrated by national and local authorities against Roma should be addressed in order to effectively tackle anti-Gypsyism and the historical injustices. we can use different means. On the one hand, are social inclusion policies to address the social inequalities and exclusion. Then implementation of human rights and non-discrimination legislation and measures. Of course, education, and that's always important to stress. Education of Roma and also of the majority society. Definitely, besides recognition and redistribution, we need representation. Roma participation is key for social change. But then we also realized that this is not enough, and we might need something else to deal with the past. And from the experience of other groups used to be quite effective was the transitional justice-like tools to deal with past injustices. The aim of the transitional justice tools are three. On the one hand, it brings to light past injustices, raising awareness. Then it builds also a common narrative on the current situation of Roma and injustices and inequalities in society. And then it facilitates mutual trust among Roma and non-Roma. I think it's important to say that transitional justice should include three important aspects: the right to know, the right to justice, and the right to reparations. These are key for the efficiency of transitional justice-like tools. And let me point out a few important things. On the one hand, the right to know. Now, many might question if there is a written right, like the right to know. And an analysis of the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, but also of the European Court of Justice, especially in a few cases involving the investigations in prisons and the detainees of suspected terrorists. Yeah, it's very clearly stated the right to know, which is also belongs to individuals, also to the larger public. Now that we are facing a pandemic, yeah, a global pandemic, we see, and this is the popular expression of the right to know, that we all want to know how to deal with this pandemic. So the right to know is becoming more and more popular in our societies. Then, of course, the right to justice, it's clear that victims should be heard and justice should be served in the 21st century and in Europe. And then there is the right to reparations, that individuals redress for survivors, and moral and indirect compensations for communities is key to fix past injustices. Yeah. And here it is what this right also entails: an acknowledgement of past injustices, memorialization of events, commemoration of victims, but also celebrations of survivors and those who helped. An important tool in transitional justice is Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And in our 2019 studies, together with CEPS and Alliance Against Antigypsyism, we presented there the experiences in different countries with TRC, and also some limited experiences in Europe. Therefore, establishing Truth and Reconciliation Commissions is a step in the right direction to deal with the past. I'll just say that TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, will raise public awareness and build a common narrative on the injustices in our societies, but also by serving justice, will strengthen public trust in democratic institutions and among the citizens, something that we need to fix in our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julius. And thank you especially for highlighting these crucial elements about bringing to the light past injustices and these three dimensions of the right to know, the right to justice, and the right to reparations. I think 2 years ago, we also discussed about the right to reconciliation. But I think some of that dimension, then what do they actually mean? That also requires our reflection. And why some of that was, especially the issue of reconciliation, was debated very much. But let's go deeper in this process on understanding the approach of truth and reconciliation processes and structures, like such as truth and reconciliation commissions. And there were already important insights from that study that was prepared 2 years ago. And I'd like to ask Lena, can you share some of the lessons learned, maybe from a non-European context, but what is important here for our discussion and for such a transitional justice approach?
Thank you, Jonathan. And first of all, it's a great pleasure to see you all here today, as Ergo, Central Council, and ourselves, SEPS, have been putting a great effort to have you here participating and discussing. I would like, I would like a bit to share my screen, if that will be possible. Yeah. Okay, let's keep it for now. So speaking about Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and we have actually looked for inspiration into South African, Canadian, and Australian Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and the way they shaped the narrative about what happened to those communities. Actually, as Julius have mentioned, it was very important for those communities that have experienced either indigenous and First Nation people or Black and colored communities in South Africa, all the sufferings they have experienced. There was a feeling that they need to bring it forward and to be of these experiences to shape part of the common narrative on what is Australia, what is South Africa, and what is Canada all about, and that actually also to acknowledge their own contributions in the making of this history. So of course those commissions have been accompanied by some court processes, also public hearings that made both sides of the community to hear what happened. Maybe South African example is the best known about the public hearings that took for several years, that have been broadcasted on a national radio, and that really made an impact to realize, you know, what this rainbow nation is puzzled with or from, and how those countries can coexist. And here I would like to share the quote from a South African commission, that precisely dealing with the past means knowing what happened. We also need to know about the past so we can renew and resolve our commitment that never again such violations will take place. We need to know about the past in order to establish a culture of respect for human rights. It's only by accounting for the past that we can become accountable for the future. And we felt that this also deeply resonated with what's happened across Europe with Roma communities. So today we are also commemorating 50 years of first World Roma Congress that happened in London in 1971, that has been already touched upon. And actually one of their very important goals has been also to recognize what happened for Roma communities during the World War World War II, also World War I, as to recognize that Roma communities during the times of atrocities faced unprecedented pressures. And here it came this our study on truth and reconciliation that Julius also shared, and I will just share a little of our taking the stock. So here we were taking the stock from 1971 of the mentioned World War Congress, and actually the very practical meaning of telling the truth and hearing the victims of anti-Gypsyism, also ongoing anti-Gypsyism, we believe that this helps to capture ongoing and continuous, especially institutional and structural anti-Gypsyism. And here we have in 2019 the event that you mentioned, convoked by Soraya Post, where we heard 5 Romani women to share their stories, their testimonies, and here is a moment of standing ovations where people were moved, and by hearing these testimonies. So we think that this really helps for people to realize what happened, and this gives the narrative in order to apply the non-discrimination approaches, and especially to apply the rule of law approaches, and why systemic racism must be captured by, for instance, EU's fundamental rights, rule of law and democracy monitoring mechanism, and how it could be. I mean, we already have and heard Commissioner Jourova to speak how certain forms such as education, segregation in education could be captured, but there are way more deeper rooted issues. For instance, how the police and law enforcement are still looking at Roma, and we still have countries that in some countries today, some ministries are inventing ethnically, the ways how to ethnically profile Roma in order to monitor radicalized Roma in the member states, and this even gets funded under EU funds. So, I mean, here is this stands against the background why CHACHIPEN and how we can invoke this rule of law approaches along this truth and reconciliation as to give this bigger narrative. And of course, this should forcefully come along with Roma civic and political participation. And I stop here.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you for highlighting that while we do see progress, maybe in the sense of a recognition of anti-Gypsyism as a specific form of racism, we also need to be very careful and be very aware that we still face so many hidden, sometimes even obvious forms of institutional anti-Gypsyism across Europe. And I think what is very important when you showed and you shared our experience from the March 2019 conference during the EU Roma Week, that we heard very powerful voices of individuals and their suffering and also their struggle for justice. And I think it caused one of the important questions for a transitional justice approach is what role do we play? What role does academia play? What role do civil society organizations play, maybe that aim to represent communities and organizations? But I think there was a very strong agreement that it's extremely important to give space for the voices of the victims, for the voices of the people that struggle for justice. And I think this is something that we need to keep in mind. But I want to move forward to a next aspect of this, and Julius mentioned the right to know the truth, the right to know of what happened in the past. And I wonder, and I'd like to ask Marcus and to join me in that reflection. What do we already have enough historical knowledge about centuries of anti-Gypsyism, and what are the gaps, and what is the role of academia? I remember in one of the studies that you produced for the Central Council about anti-Gypsyism and police, that we can really see how long actually and how deeply embedded this is in the history of police work. And I think one of the aspects came up that anti-Gypsyism was very strongly connected to police interaction in Europe and the setting up of Interpol. And I think that's also a question. So what is our knowledge about that, or how we can set the agenda here forward? Yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation. First of all, let me talk about my role here very quickly. I'm a member of this expert commission, but I don't speak as a representative. But I'm quite confident that all of us agree that this expert commission, kind of knowledge production commission, is not at all a TRC, not even the beginning of a TRC. And I want actually to continue ongoing from Lina and Julius what might be the conditions, and this will also answer Jonathan's question. I mean, we heard a lot about now those definitions are accepted and the concept of anti-Gypsyism is acknowledged, but I want to ask, what would that mean, acknowledgement? And I mean, we heard a lot about anti-Gypsyism is normal. Lina gave us examples, but I asked myself, where are the governments, where are the societies that really accept that? I mean, Jonathan, you mentioned this study. I would say in a really democratic society, a study produced like this would raise large concerns among a government itself that, oh, there's a problem. We have to face that. Please, Jonathan, can you tell me how many government institutions, police institutions approached you and asked you, help us remedy that? None of them did. So at the moment, we are still at a phase where the organizations of Romani and Sinti, some people from academia are pressuring this change, this acceptance, but it's not really a social situation where we accept that anti-Gypsyism fundamentally structures society, lawmaking, police, and so on. And I think that's really something we have to acknowledge. We are still in this historic situation of ongoing injustice. We're not yet at a situation where the society says, okay, we accepted there is this injustice, and now we want to work through that, through those TRCs. So I would say this would be a first step, that Germany acknowledges that in the last years, a lot of lawmaking processes done by this government are influenced by anti-Gypsyism. This is an interesting process, as at the same time, this government put up these expert commissions, put up programs against anti-Gypsyism, but at the same time in in policing, in migration policies, in refugee policies, a lot of lawmaking processes are shaped by anti-Gypsyist discussions in Germany, and I'm quite sure in other EU countries as well as on an EU level. We are having those discussions sponsored by EU, but as Lina put it, we have a lot of EU police institutions that are shaping forms of racial profiling of Romani and Sinti people all over Europe, and an exchange about that. We have genetic databases of Roma that are sponsored by EU countries, and I could go on like this. So I think we are in a very ambiguous time at the moment, where there's this small part where there is an acknowledgement, there is a problem, but at the same time, it is kind of detached from the general society that just goes on with this injustice. So I would say we are still at an historic time where we are not even yet ready for those TRCs. And in my opinion, those should be much more fundamental than, for example, a commission or something. And I also like the I mean, TRC is like Truth Reconciliation Commissions. I prefer the wording used in the study, which is like process. And maybe we could even drop the commission and use TRP as a Truth and Reconciliation process, as I think it's not about one commission, but it's really about putting up a whole social process. And then we should ask ourselves, and I mean, the study did a lot of research about that, how would such a process look like? And I think it would need to be bottom up as well. I think there should be a structure from the government, but then and funding and resources, but then it needed to be a bottom up process on a large scale. It would of course need to be community driven, which is extremely important. And it would, yeah, I want to strengthen those three things that you just mentioned. We need to talk about past injustices. We need to create a common understanding of what's going on. And that should be the foundation of building trust. And I imagine this should take place on a local level as well, because I don't know, a Romani community in Hamburg might have a specific experience with a teacher at a school or a board at a school or a specific mayor or so on. And I think it's very important that those experiences that can differ from city to city, from country to country, that they are acknowledged as well. And this is nothing that an expert commission can do. We cannot like create a knowledge of all of the anti-Gypsyism. This is something that has to be created from the bottom up. So I think what we first needed is like a real commitment. I would like governments not to tell us what they achieved, but to accept what they didn't achieve yet. And this would be like the precondition to start those processes, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus, for placing this approach on transitional justice, let's say in a wider framework of our civil rights struggle that we are leading, and maybe to really recognize that we are still at the beginning, and we should never forget that there is such a long-term objective, but there is also maybe to say there is an enemy, there is a struggle that we need to face, and sometimes it makes it difficult in our context to accept, but also to overcome the certain contradictions that we are facing. So we do have governments that make progress in acknowledging, in recognizing anti-Gypsyism as a specific form of racism. But at the same time, anti-Gypsyism influences policies, practices, institutional behavior. And I think what is important in what you highlight, but this is a topic for our next panel, is to really look at the models of also truth and reconciliation processes, commissions, expert commissions. And maybe this is important for us to reflect. What are we speaking about? How this can be organized in a way, or maybe it cannot just be organized, but we need to see it as a longer term endeavor that requires many of us and many actors to be engaged. But I leave this for the next panel. I think there is an important call I can hear from you, but also from what has been previously raised by Lina and by Julius, in that truth and reconciliation processes need to be bottom up and community driven in order to bring light to those injustices. And a question I wanted to also raise to Miriam, who could not join today, Miriam Caroli, but I want to ask maybe and Gabriela, is there has been a growing mobilization around the remembrance of the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti, and do you think we do have already a form of remembrance culture, remembrance discourse, and a recognition of the Holocaust, and how much is this important for building a community bottom-up driven discussion about anti-Gypsyism?
Thank you, Jonathan. Though this is not exactly what as Ergo we are really engaged in, but kind of seeing the importance. I think the importance. Yeah? think the importance is enormous. And I would ask Adrian to mute himself. We see practically what I think that what we witnessed lately is that Roma are getting on the agenda. We were struggling a lot that, for example, when during the kind of general Holocaust days, Roma were never really mentioned. We didn't have Roma participating at the OSN sessions in Geneva and New York. We didn't have Roma participated or not giving a floor at the European Parliament. And I think this is something that, you know, we see very, very slowly. Roma are giving some place, but not still kind of the relevant place that we deserve as one of the group that practically almost vanished during the World War II. So I think that here we still have a lot of work to do and a lot of lobbying and advocacy. And I think, for example, this year with the European Parliament, we didn't manage to actually have a good and respectful recognition in January during the session in the European Parliament. On the other hand, I see that there is a certain mobilization when it comes to the kind of Roma recognition and Roma remembrance. We have acknowledged, we see that 2nd August, it's being acknowledged in many countries of the European Union, but also beyond. We see many Roma coming to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and also thanks to your work, Jonathan of Ternipe, and the youth networks, we see like thousands. I think that by these 10 years, it's actually thousands of youngsters that visited Auschwitz and Birkenau, and not just visited, but also had a chance to reflect and to learn something, so that they actually can kind of absorb and then spread further. And I think that this is the most important, that like what we still need and we still need to support is this education about the Romani Holocaust, starting with ourselves, but also focusing on the majority of society. And there we are also lacking. We don't have the reference on the Romani Holocaust and the recognition of the Romani Holocaust in the textbooks, or very small sentences, short sentences in the textbooks, etc. So I think that here is still a lot we have to done, but there were some small steps that should be acknowledged, and we can learn from them and take them further.
Thank you, Gabi. You actually raised a question which also came from the audience here in the Q&A about how we can rebuild trust between Roma and non-Roma through teaching Roma history. Julius, do you want to take this up?
Yeah, as I said, historically, due to the relations Roma had with settled populations since their arrival into Europe and later on, this the public trust of Roma in state institutions and in the majority population is very low. Yeah, but also the majority population and the state institutions do not trust Roma. And this is a damaged relation for centuries. So in order to overcome this, yeah, it's not enough only to recognize part of the larger events that happen in history, such as Holocaust. Yeah, there is a need for much more. And one of these is, of course, truth and reconciliation processes. And as part of that, establishing a commission to investigate past experiences of Roma. Just to give an example, the recognition of Roma as victims of Holocaust has to be investigated by such a commission. It is known by a very small group of people that for Roma, the internment in labor camps did not end with the Second World War in 1945. Yeah, It continued, for example, in France until 1946. Then the recognition, the legal recognition of Roma as victims in Germany was dismissed in 1955 by the German Supreme Court. Yeah, and it came much later. So all these aspects showed that the Holocaust of Roma, it's not enough just to be recognized, but has to be put in the right spot. It's the same with other events that happen. For example, we have limited knowledge on the oppression of Roma under communism. I think we have to investigate what exactly happened. And in this case, raising awareness, it's a positive thing it's a step in the right direction to build trust, to build empathy among citizens, that something like that should not happen because it happened to Roma, but it might happen to anyone else if we don't take a stand on these issues. So to me, the recognition is very much linked with the right to know. And this is something that hopefully will heal our societies.
I thank you, Julius. I take this as an argument also for the teaching Roma history issue and for raising awareness, in the sense that we have two issues here. One is that we do need much more research to uncover the truth, to uncover past injustices. And maybe we need to face the fact that while it's important that we directly give the voice to victims of anti-Gypsyism nowadays, and I remember 5 years ago when we had Elena with us, but also I think Angelina from Kosovo, and the stories also from the racist murders in Hungary, from police violence in France, and from Linda Greta Ziga from the kind of who suffered the forced evictions in Cluj in Romania. Here we raise directly the voices, but at the same time we need knowledge production. And this is also because the history of anti-Gypsyism goes back much further, and here we still have Holocaust survivors, but let's say there is a complex issue of centuries of anti-Gypsyism that need to be investigated, and that is a basis for also history teaching and awareness raising. But I do believe we need to go at some moment deeper into that question, how this can be done, what already exists, and how Roma, non-Roma structures, institutions can join forces here in order to take this forward. But knowledge production requires resources and funding. This is addressed here in the Q&A by Michal Miko from Czech Republic, because at the end, what are we aiming for? Are we aiming for, let's say, research funding that is supporting, especially also Romani scholars, to go deeper into that research? Potentially, and I think this is what we want to discuss in the next panel, that certain structures like these independent commissions on anti-Gypsyism can provide on a national level such a framework that can also finance for several years a much in-depth and structural analysis. But I do think that is an important remark of Michal that needs to be considered, because often in the world of all these social inclusion programs, there has been no much investment to really invest into this direction. But I think for us in this panel, I still want to stay at one question. When it comes to truth and reconciliation questions, we often look into a direction that this is a process that needs to be taking place on a national level, of course, with a very strong local dimension, but there is also the need of the responsibility, the accountability, the role of the national government. and with all the challenges that were addressed by Marcus, to say that actually here it's also governments and societies that need to look into the mirror and make a huge step, and maybe that step that we're still waiting for, to acknowledge their own responsibility. And this is why this is such a painful process, to actually agree and to face that responsibility. But I do think for one of the questions I still have, and hopefully we will look for answers in the CHACHIPEN project now in the next 2 years. How much do we need such a process on a European level? I mean, is this only something to take place on a national, in a national context, or do we need a European dimension of a truth and reconciliation process, such a transitional justice approach? I think, Marcus, you already you kept it short. You highlighted some aspect, maybe with police interaction, level of policies, ethnic profiling. But I wonder, and a question here to the four of you, do you have any arguments why this needs to be done on a European level?
Oh, nobody's unmuting,
Julia?
so I will.
Or Gabi?
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I would just say that for me, and especially because we are active on the European level, I see that we need to kind of create the space to play a role, right? So that the European institution, they should kind of set a good example. So first, by themselves, kind of acting very participatory, engaging Roma in the all processes and making sure that the processes are transparent and that they are setting a very good ground. And the ground, I would say, like, first of all, of giving a clear guidance to the member states, and also the Western Balkan, Turkey, but also setting a legal background. And now we are talking, for example, about this new Roma EU binding law, or a new equality directive. So we are kind of moving towards making sure that the anti-Gypsyism is acknowledged, and that the guideline and kind of processes are being outlined, and that the member states are also being helped practically in implementing and developing their own path. So I think that it's very crucial. And what I'm still missing, and it's the political will, that to also the European political leaders to show up a bit more of courage, or actually commenting and kind of, I would say, discouraging those who are continuing taking the anti-Gypsyism as a norm at the national and local level, because we have nobody who would stand up for Roma. And I think that the European institution can actually play much better role in that.
Julia?
Yeah, I say there are at least 3 reasons for having an international dimension. One is that the European institutions, but also international institutions like UN, are also contributing to maintaining the status quo, if not taking direct actions. And we just have an example. The issue of anti-Gypsyism came up in the discussions with the European Commission a while ago. But however, it took the European Commission more than 6 or 7 years to acknowledge that fact and to include it as a priority now in the EU framework. And the second argument is that there is a link between the right to know of what happened to us as Roma in the European history, why all these divisions and scattered around, and what happened to us also collectively. Let's not forget that the Holocaust was also an attempt that we know to eradicate Europe of gypsiness, as they were stigmatized in the public imaginary, and we still don't know what happened at the European level, and how the coordination among different actors that were part of those policies. And of course, the third argument is that we as scholars and activists fighting for combating anti-Gypsyism, we are part of a larger movement on combating racism and fighting for social justice. So we have to build solidarity and to be next to our brothers and sisters that are fighting for social justice and against racism everywhere. We cannot just, oh, we are for these values, but are only in our courtyard. We have to build that kind of solidarity.
Thank you, Julius. We're slowly coming to an end. Marcus, Lina, do you still want to contribute to that last question or discussion?
Just very briefly, I would like to add that also in this our study that I can show it here, we also said that what EU could do to do this grounding work, and as Michal Miko raised the question, indeed funding research to do this background work or to gather this evidence that would show that yes, it's needed, yes, we need to move forward with this truth and reconciliation processes or expert commissions, depending what's preferred in each national context. This could be a very good, at least starting base to move forward. And actually CHACHIPEN is precisely, you know, a thing in action that we'll be trying to do it. And we hope to hear more from you and to get your inputs.
From my perspective, such a process, for me, European level would not be the first target of the process itself. I think it can support the framework and give resources and projects like this, but maybe from a political lobbying perspective, it would be interesting to try to find a region or a city that is willing and is like not doing this as a publicity stunt, but is really willing to do this. I just read the news, you probably know the same about it as me, but that in the US, one city now started to pay reparations to Black residents, not for slavery itself, but for the discrimination between 1919 and 1969. So during like officially democratic US. So that would maybe be a perspective to see if there's a city or region that somehow tries to embrace such an idea and tries to really put forward such a process and develop the idea of how such a process could work out. So maybe this would be another idea, not to lobby on the European level or on a national level, but really to try to find partners, maybe some partners that together share their ideas and their experiences about how to begin such a process.
Thank you, Marcus, for pointing out that we need brave stakeholders to have the courage and also the vision to take this forward. And this can happen on a local level. It can happen on a national level. And while we also heard some important arguments that there are overarching issues concerning anti-Gypsyism that are relevant across Europe, maybe also that require specific investigation and research, such as the issue of databases, racial profiling, and police work, but also the influence of anti-Gypsyism on policies. But at the same time, this is important that we have these processes on a local and national level. Now, we need to close this panel and take some of the important questions also forward to our following discussions. And I think here it's important to highlight again the question of you and Dominika, maybe especially for this afternoon, of the work that can be done on awareness raising, on anti-Gypsyism, on Roma history. And I think there is another important question and issue raised by Michal Miko, how, since we are part of an an advocacy process, let's say, also to advocate for this transitional justice approach. It's important for us to keep in mind both how we advocate for more investment into scholarship, into research. At the same time, Michal questioned the issue of how such a process, which especially if it's on the European level, is very far away from people. How this connects to grassroots work, and how this connects to the issue, how this contributes to bring dignity to Romani people and Romani communities, how this changes the narrative. Since, and I think this is the example he shares, people are so heavily impacted by anti-Gypsyism that this influences a lot both the willingness to, the ability to openly identify, even in such a case as a census, but also to a different narrative that is a positive narrative for a civil rights movement. Now, these are some of the questions for later on, I think, but thank you for raising today, especially looking at the potential of a transitional justice approach to bring forward the right to truth, the right to justice, the right to reparations, and building a new level of trust between Roma and non-Roma communities and institutions. So also for our project, I think we're just in the beginning of this project, and it needs to continue. And we need to take forward some of the discussions. And I'm glad that now we can go much deeper into the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and look at some of the existing examples and some of the project initiatives that we plan for the next 2 years in our next panel. Therefore, I thank you all for your contribution and also for the questions in the chat. And I'd like to hand over the discussion to our next moderator, Lina, who will moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you. We can have 5 minutes of break. So we'll start at 11:15. And I'm just inviting the panelists to join me on the panel and to stay with your cameras open.